Welcome back to the Betoota Advocate Betoota Talk segment. My favourite podcast of the week, Wendell.
You say that about every podcast we do, Errol Parker, but
I do.
It is your favourite thing, getting in the booth here and talking.
Getting in the booth, meeting new and interesting people.
That's it. We're keeping the political theme going. This week we are talking to the deputy leader of the Liberal Party. We finally got a high-ranking Lib in the building, and we're excited about it. Sussan Ley, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Lovely to join you.
Thanks for coming on down. Looking forward to talking to you today. But I was kind of curious, looking up your backstory. It's been an interesting journey to politics by the looks of it. Your dad was a spook and you were born in Nigeria?
That's right. Grew up in the Emirates. Came to Australia as a teenager.
Yeah.
Loved every minute ever since. Always say when I talk to people who have migrated here, often on citizenship ceremonies, you've come to the best country on earth. That was the feeling I had when I stepped off the plane in Brisbane, looking at this brilliant blue sky from a cold English boarding school. And I mean, I never have lost that sense of gratitude for what Australia has given me.
I can imagine English boarding school to Queensland. Is that where you ended up?
Yes, to Murphy's Creek, bottom of the range from Toowoomba, to a small hobby farm.
That's a change of pace.
And a tiny school.
Yeah.
And a whole classroom of kids who laughed at me because I didn't sound quite right.
Yeah. Was your old man still working in the spy game when he came out here?
Look, that's an open question because after life on the hobby farm for a few months, we suddenly packed up and went to Canberra where he got a job with the AFP. He's always been a fluent Arabic speaker and I think he did a bit of behind-the-scenes work there. But, you know, he never talked about it. Yeah. Died aged 103 and would never accept that anyone could say that he was a spy for the British government. But hey, I figure the Official Secrets Act must expire someday.
Part of the job for him, I guess. And how did you find your way to politics?
A long story. I only ever wanted to fly aeroplanes, and that was one of the things I looked at that brilliant blue sky in Queensland and loved it. And you know, my pathway into flying was a challenging one because my parents said, well, that's a silly idea. You need to go to university. So I finished school, Dixon College in Canberra, worked 3 jobs, saved all my money. When you really want to do something as badly as I wanted to fly airplanes, you would think you'd be quite good at it. I wasn't good at it at all. So I persisted. And I finally got there and I ended up flying airplanes, actually doing aerial stock mustering. I think I was probably the first woman in Australia to get an aerial mustering endorsement. That took me to Thargomindah in Western Queensland. And I flew there for quite a while. I married a shearer who was also a farmer, came home on the farm.
Yeah.
Times were really tough and you realised I needed to go to university and earn serious money. Went to university when I was 30, did economics, tax law, accounting, had my children and joined the Liberal Party. But what brought me into politics was this slowly dawning realisation that people in the Canberra bubble, a long, long way from where I was, didn't understand what my life was like, didn't understand the small rural community that I lived in, didn't understand what it was like to be a mum with 3 small children, struggling with money, with childcare, with a future, with a small business. And one thing led to another. So put up my hand and didn't get there the first time and then ended up becoming the member for Farrer, which is a beautiful, beautiful part of Western New South Wales.
Do you reckon that's changed? Do you reckon people in the Canberra bubble get it any more now than they did 25 years ago?
Some do, some don't. Look, I don't automatically knock Canberra. I went to school there and I quite like the place. But of course, Canberra Parliament is quite different from Canberra, the city. I think unless you make yourself reconnect, if indeed you don't already connect, it will, in the end, consume you. So it's never interested me to be part of that Canberra bubble, and part of that is because I go home to Western New South Wales to my people. You've got one Betoota hotel. I've got probably about 6 or 7. In fact, I've got one a couple of hours north of Balranald in a place called Homebush. And I just wonder why we aren't actually sitting there doing the podcast. You know what? I could fly you there in my Cessna.
we
we could
actually
land
had
at the airstrip, and we could actually
A couple off the wood at the Homebush Hotel?
Homebush Hotel,
Homebush
north of
Hotel.
Balranald.
Yeah.
About half an hour north of Balranald, just on the edge of Mungo.
Yes.
Well, maybe we'll do that before the election.
We could either go there or we could go to Pooncarie.
You can go to in fact, I flew into Pooncarie not that long ago.
It's a lovely pub in Pooncarie.
Yeah.
You've got the dangly aeroplane earrings on. What is it about flying you love so much?
I love the discipline and the focus. I love the fact that when you're in the sky, you see yourself reflected back at you. I know that sounds a bit strange, but it effectively takes you away from the processes that you can get caught up in every day to something that allows you to consider a greater mission. And obviously I've had greater missions in my life, and politics is one of them. I'm, passionate about what I do, but it allows you to just appreciate the craft of something. I spend a lot of time talking to kids and saying, just don't think you have to go to university. I'm sick of this attitude that if you haven't made it to university, you haven't made it in life. And what I did when I finished school was effectively, like flying an airplane was a manual trade. And that gives you something that I don't think books and learning can. And I've had the benefit of both. But I just, I love the discipline. I love the focus. I actually love anything that's engineering too. So the machine that is the plane fascinates me. And I love the fact that I can get around my electorate and see so many people in so many places without spending hours and hours on the road. And obviously we're all trying to cram a lot into our busy professional lives. And I love the fact that Australia, I think I've always said this, should be the home of flying training worldwide. We should really make much of the advantages we have when it comes to aviation.
I was about to say that because they've just built that lovely new airport out at Wentworth, which is on the confluence of the Murray and the Darling. And
they've extended the runway.
And they've tarred it. They were about to put in a flying school there, but they knocked it back and they ended up going across the river to Mildura.
It's sort of a lot of that's gone away during COVID. There's a few challenges there, Errol, and but I think the broader point is that flying training and general aviation in Australia needs a lot more support than it's getting. And I love talking to people, and it's also such a great connector of rural communities. 75% of Australians, I think that's the figure now, could be higher, live 50 kilometres or closer to the coast. Look at our state of New South Wales. It's defined by the Great Dividing Range. Everyone on one side, or nearly everyone on one side, and a few people west of the range. So one of the things I've always fought for in my political life is to bring the character, the personality, the strengths, the beauty, the opportunity of regional Australia to the city, which is why I'm a Liberal.
You said before that there were aspects of flying that you weren't good at, which led you go to other things in life. What part of flying did you find challenging?
When I started to fly, it was in a small Cessna and was very turbulent, so I actually got airsick, which is not uncommon. And so I found it hard to concentrate and just had to push through that, and push through it I did. It was quite funny. At one point, my flying instructor said, "Are you sure you want to do this? Because we actually don't think you're very suited to it." And I thought, you're taking my money. I'm here every day. I'm working 3 jobs. I used to, sling hash at a takeaway diner called Jilly's Roadside Diner after my job in the public service. And then after that, I'd go and clean my department stores, vacuum till 2 a.m. And then I'd turn up for my flying lessons at lunchtime, and then to be told you're not very good at this. But
grumpy old bloke, or what was the go?
Grumpy young bloke, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, in the end, he finally signed me off to go solo, and then he was very proud of me when I got my first Outback flying job. But I think what that taught me was persistence. I'm a great believer that persistence is, the number one thing that gets you through.
I suppose that Thargomindah would be a good place to learn how to fly a plane. I mean, you've got a lot of really high quality landmarks there. I mean, you've got the Bulloo, you've got the Wilson, you've got Cooper Creek to the west, so it's very hard to get lost. You got Lake Bulloo to the south, and up north you've got the oil fields of
Eromanga Basin. Yeah. So the Channel Country.
What part of Thargomindah were you working in?
Well, the plane was based in Thargo, and the
Plane was in
shearing run,
Thargo.
I worked for a shearing contractor who had a run that went from Julia Creek to Broken Hill,
Yep.
and probably, a fair bit to the east as well. And so what I would do is muster the sheep before the shearers would come. So these were big sheds. They went for several weeks at a time.
Yep.
But what part of that? I loved it. I loved it. And I remember once coming back, I couldn't turn the lights on. So when you're flying into a small airport at night, you've got something called pilot-activated lighting. So you press your VHF radio 3 times. Anyway, the lights didn't come on, so I had to land in the dark because I didn't have enough fuel to go anywhere else, and there wasn't anywhere else to go. And that was probably the hairiest experience I had, but there were plenty of other really, really great experiences, as I'm sure you've had in Outback Australia.
Well, yeah, I used to work for a bloke called Walshy at Isis Downs out of Isisford.
Mm-hmm.
When he was up in his plane once, he used to key bang it to get the cattle running, and he'd do that
very
by
naughty.
He'd pull the throttle out and then he'd push it in again, and he'd turn it off and go bang. And once he's gone whoop and just bang, and he's pushed the throttle through the dashboard, and it was on full, and he had to fly around for hours until he was able to land with no fuel. So yeah.
Yeah, well, it was actually
Good
near
yarn,
Isis.
Walshy.
It was near Isis Downs that I did my first actual shearing shed. So when my employer disappeared because he owed the tax office money and I had no job, I had to go work in the sheds, and I'd watched it, but I hadn't done it. So I was sort of thrown onto the board, pick up 800 fleeces a day. It was so incredibly hot and difficult. I'd put my head completely under the trough, and just sort of think, how on earth am I going to get through? But it was good. It taught me a lot. And then I did a lot of cooking in the sheds as well, because I went to one place where the cook didn't turn up. So they looked around, saw the first woman, said, "You'll do," into the kitchen with you. And yeah, I loved cooking for shearers. Hardest job I've ever done.
Given your old man's background and your love of flying, was it ever a consideration to go somewhere like the Air Force?
In those days, I don't think I would have been accepted because I was told you wear glasses. And I don't think there were women. Well, I know there weren't women pilots in the Air Force then. This was a few years ago.
Yeah, right.
Wendell, yeah.
There you go. What did your mum do? What was her background?
Yeah. She always worked. She always believed that in an era where you were often a housewife, she had her own, she sort of carved out her own career. She was actually a psychiatric nurse in Queensland and in Canberra, and her work gave me a real interest in mental health and how to support people with challenging mental health conditions. And sometimes the job of a local MP is to talk to people who are experiencing those challenges. So I sort of got that from her. That was something she was really interested in.
And I'm assuming they instilled political values in you and wanted you to go on and do this sort of stuff as well?
They were Liberals. They wanted me to go to university and get a proper job. I think that's how they would have summed it up. I think they were a bit curious they were shocked that I wanted to fly airplanes, and in fact refused to ever get in an airplane with me. But they were pleased when I got a job for the tax office. So I was helping do the training materials for the GST before I went into politics, and they thought that was a good job to have. Yeah, they were quite traditional. But yes, I was definitely brought up with Liberal values. I'm definitely one of those people who listened to their parents' values, but then worked it out myself on the way. In fact, it was when I went to university, as I said, age 30, and I started to study economics. I became quite fascinated with the economic policy debate, and that reassured me that I was heart and soul a Liberal.
Yeah.
We spoke to Bridget Archer a couple of weeks ago. She was she's an ardent believer of the Robert Menzies vision of what a Liberal is. What's your vision of what of what being a Liberal is?
Small governments, getting out of the way of the private sector, letting people thrive and shine in whatever field they want. I often contrast when people talk about that key philosophical difference, that we believe in equality of opportunity, whereas some of our opponents believe in equality of outcome. And I think that's a critical difference between the two, because we want people to be their very best with no criticism about where they may get to. But we don't want to say that you can't be too good and you can't fail too much, which is, I think, a bit of it's a pretty socialist view of the world. And I know from the small businesses I meet every day what they ask of me. and they say, we're overwhelmed with regulation. It's tough times, and obviously cost of living crisis. It's really tough, and we know what we can do really well, and we want the chance to be able to do that. And I love the innovation, the entrepreneurship, the sheer having a crack. And every time something from government or an agenda that's associated with government squashes that, I see how wrong it is.
Mm. What do you make of the idea of quotas in the Liberal Party? I know it's a topic that frequently has come up in the last couple of years. What's your view on it?
We need more women in the Liberal Party. We have amazing women in the Liberal Party, and we have amazing young women. People often think that as the leaders of the party, Peter Dutton and I get to choose, who stands in what seat and what it all looks like. But it's a party organisation, and decisions are made by the party members. And the party members are entitled, within the democracy of our party, which is different from the Labor Party, where there's a lot of captain's calls about people being installed into seats, they get to choose. We had a review after the last election, and that gave our state divisions targets that they all signed on to encourage more women in. And everywhere I go, when I talk to young women who might be in local politics or might be in a leadership position, I ask them to consider not just necessarily federal politics, but just taking the next step of leadership in their community, in their life, that might at some stage give them a political career. And I talk about it, but it's a tough game for women. It's a tough game for anyone, I guess. But it's tough for women, and it's always hard to balance family, and it's always hard to work out how you will do that when you have to be away from home long periods of time. So it's not for everyone.
How can the party attract more women? I mean, we've seen a raft of teals popping up over the last few years who a lot of them arguably would fit into the Liberal Party and share a lot of values with the Liberal Party. How can the Liberal Party attract more women moving forward?
Well, I don't think they do share the values of the Liberal Party, because if they did, they would be in the Liberal Party, or they would find ways to talk to fellow Liberals about their vision and know, I think, that it actually doesn't align with ours. However, what I want to see and what I am seeing is leadership from women who are standing right now for us, who are in positions of leadership. So, example, the Northern Territory Chief Minister, Leah Finocchiaro, is a dynamic young woman. The member, we've got members in the Parliament that are already you know of. The candidate for Bradfield, Giselle Capitarian, just north of here, is an outstanding young woman. And we've got Amelia Hamer in Kooyong, which is often called a teal seat. It was obviously, we lost it at the last election. We've got Jamie Rogers in Warringah, Zali Steggles Patch, and, I could go on around the country. There's some outstanding young women. So by naming them, I want to give you that sense that we do have some real leading lights. Our three key leaders in WA are women, including Michaelia Cash, who's our leader in the Senate, and Libby Medham, who's the leader of the Liberal Party in WA, and the leader of our party organisation is also a woman, Caroline DeRosso. So everywhere these women go, they inspire other women to come to consider the career that we have. We try to demystify it, and we are getting more women into our party. Is it fast enough? I'd like to see more. I'm always ambitious for more women to join the party.
One thing about the Liberal Party being in a rural seat really is that the division of Farrer was the seat of arguably, the godfather of the modern National Party, Tim Fischer. What happened there for the National Parties to give up arguably one of their bluest seats?
Well, you would probably have to ask them that. But when I was running as the candidate in what we called a three-cornered contest, because when Tim Fischer suddenly retired, then it becomes open for both a Liberal and a National to contest. And it was interesting because I actually didn't win the seat on National Party preferences. The primary vote lead I had was significant. I think it was about 12,000, followed by the Nationals, followed by Labor. So the Labor Party preferences were distributed to the Nationals candidate, and I actually won the seat by 206 votes. And coincidentally, the Cessna 206 is my favourite bush aircraft, so it was serendipitous. But I think people were attracted to what I was saying as a candidate, and, I'm not here to run down the National Party, but there's a key difference. So I'm a Liberal because I don't believe that we should sit in rural Australia, stamp our feet and say, give us more, look after us better, we want a fair share, or anything like that. I'm about bringing the city and the country together. Sure, that city-country divide worries me, it always has, but we are one country, and city people love rural Australia. After I brought you again, by the sound of it, Errol, you've been there before, but all of you to the Homebush Hotel, and, we've sat yarning outside and lit a fire in a 44-gallon drum, and,
I much prefer Pooncarie.
Yeah, or Pooncarie, yes.
But
what I'm saying is that people, there shouldn't be that divide, and it's quite possible to bridge it.
So Mark Coulton, your electorate neighbour up in Parks, he's retiring. Could you see the Libs running a candidate in Parks?
I think we should run in every seat as a Liberal, but obviously for a variety of reasons that doesn't always work, and arrangements are made where, to maximise the chance of the coalition winning seats, maybe the Nationals run in some and we run in others. By the way, I'm always pushing for more Liberals, and I'm a very, very strong fighter for rural Liberals, of whom there are more in the Parliament than there are Nationals.
Well, I suppose it was one in and one out, really, when Bruce Scott retired, and then we got young David in as our local member, who has done great things for the people of Betoota.
It's on a razor-thin margin up here at this election. I think it's only about 29 to 30%.
Yeah, look, I think
they took 0.4 off him at the last election, so he'll be watching his seat carefully, I'm assuming. What we asked Albanese a couple of weeks ago about how closely the Australian landscape seems to be following US politics at the moment. And obviously there's a huge amount of division and a lot of stuff, I think, that we can all agree happening in the United States that people don't want to see here. One of those things is division and polarization and people going at each other and falling just directly on either side of the line. How do you kind of navigate trying to bring people together and not divide people in politics? An avenue and an arena where you can often be so adversarial.
John Howard always said that politics or government is formed in the sensible centre, and I like that. And I think the key is not to get angry with people who have different views than you do, to passionately fight for the views that you do have. It's one of the things I love about the Liberal Party. You can have a range of views in our party room, and they're not all the same. But it's okay. We're all Liberals. We all unite behind the common values of our party. Whatever I do and say is about Australia's national interest. I don't look overseas at any country and adopt what they might be doing or think that somehow they have some advantages over us. But I think, and I listened, or I have listened to your previous podcasts, I think it's an interesting discussion when people look at the Parliament and believe that we're all fighting all the time, and obviously in Question Time, which is a piece of theatre that sort of sits in the middle of a very long parliamentary day, that is how it can come across. But a lot of the rest of the time, there's a lot of very good collegiate work going on, and a lot of areas where we do agree. Sometimes people say to me, wouldn't it be nice if you just all worked together like a giant boardroom and just came up with good ideas? And that wouldn't work, because politics is about the battle of ideas. And if you really believe that the country and the national interest are better with you in government, then that's something you actually fight for. And in fighting for it, you can get quite noisy, and you can get quite insistent. And I don't apologise for that, and I don't think anyone should. But at the same time, I do respect other people's views if they're genuinely held.
All right. This time around, the Liberals are going with get Australia back on track. Back on track to where?
Back on track to a place where we can bring inflation down, we can have an economic plan that backs in our small businesses. I can stop worrying about the communities that I represent and the anxieties they face for the future. Back on track to a sensible energy plan so this country can be the energy and therefore manufacturing superpower that I know it can be and should be. And I talk about that because my shadow portfolios are industry. Back on track so that kids aren't drifting in the school system and it can find their way into apprenticeships and pathways to a job that's meaningful. Back on track so we take our rightful place in the world in these complex geostrategic circumstances.
The energy thing, can you talk us through that? Because I feel like we're still yet to see more than a A4 page from the leader about what this grand nuclear plan is that's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars.
The first thing to say about energy, Wendell, is that everybody's energy costs are going up. Obviously, as a household, you know that. But I meet manufacturers who can't make anything in Australia anymore. And I think it's alarming when the Prime Minister says we need to make things in Australia, but doesn't actually have a plan on how to do that. I mean, it's a slogan and it might sound good and nobody could disagree with it. But unless you have cheap, reliable baseload power, you actually can't manufacture in Australia. And that's what I'm finding. So the first thing we have to do, and obviously people know that we have a nuclear energy plan, but until we get there, we have to have more gas in the system, which actually allows power to be cheaper, manufacturing to be possible where it's not, and doesn't walk away from renewables because renewables are a part of the system, but actually recognises that you have to start from a position of, let's back our businesses that do make things in Australia. With the closure or the administration of Whyalla Steel, and I know there's different circumstances around that particular company, we can't have a situation where we don't make structural steel in Australia. But if you look at these businesses and you see where the cost of energy is on the cost curve, they won't invest. And with so much of manufacturing in Australia relying on that investment, they're choosing other locations in the world.
One thing I'm curious about is we talk about gas a lot, and I look at it and I feel stupid when I see that we send copious amounts of gas offshore. And I remember sitting down with Chris Bowen just after they won the election in 2022 and asking him about the mechanism that can be pulled that stops gas going overshore and ensures that the price stays down, which obviously ensures prices stay down across the board for energy. He was talking about he could pull it and he threatened to pull it and there's ways to pull it and it takes time. 3 years later, he hasn't pulled it. That seems like a simple way of bringing power down. We look at Western Australia, power's pretty affordable over there because they have to have reserves of gas for the local market, which was described as socialism at the time, but has kept prices down. Is something like the gas mechanism that ensures Australian businesses have access to our own gas instead of being sold on Saudi spot markets and sent back to us, is that something you guys would do?
All these options should be on the table. They should all be considered as part of a gas plan, and we're considering many different aspects of such a plan right now. But I think that we have to have more gas in the system. I mean, if you're talking demand and supply, where's the supply? This is the problem. We just don't have the domestic supply of gas.
No, we do, but we send it all overseas.
Well, if there's been foreign direct investment to build that industry, then there may be contracts that back that in. That doesn't mean there isn't additional gas.
But that's where the mechanism comes in, isn't it?
Yeah,
that you go, you can't send Australian gas overseas.
And obviously that's complex and related to the contracts that might exist at the time. So I'm not saying it shouldn't be considered as part of the landscape going forward. It should. But what about all the gas that's in the system that isn't being actually activated? And one of the reasons it's not is because this is a government that says we don't like gas. They're kind of creeping back to we have to accept gas. But the message that everyone who would invest in gas projects got was don't bother because everything is going to be renewable. Now, everything can't be renewable, and that's becoming quite obvious. The average time to get a project approved in Western Australia, I'm told, is close to maybe 16 years. And some of these projects involve the supply of gas, and some of them do in New South Wales and Victoria and Queensland. Now, as a previous Environment Minister, I know that if you make fast and efficient approvals, then you can actually get the project up and running. What this government has done is actually fund the activists who take those projects effectively to court to try and stop them. So we've sort of got this crushing of the actual activity that would bring gas supply online, and that has to be sorted out.
2 questions. When you say they fund it, what do you mean by that?
The budget gave the environmental activists some money as a non-government organisation, effectively saying you're a charity and you're the Environmental Defenders Office, and millions of dollars. So that particular Environmental Defenders Office is the body that's in court challenging decisions by the government's Environment Minister that actually in a circular way is funding that doesn't actually make sense.
The EDO is a public office, isn't it? So they basically operate as the public defender's office for the environment.
Well, they can
believe.
choose whatever particular project they don't like, and that's entirely within their right. But I don't think it's right for the federal government to effectively give them funding.
So you guys would defund it?
Yes.
The other thing I'm curious about is you're talking about it's 16 years to get a project up. Say you guys are successful in April or May or whenever we're working with. How long will it take for those approvals to go through if you guys are in charge?
When I became Environment Minister before, approvals were very slow for a range of reasons. I got bogged down in red tape and bureaucracy, and they just were slow. And I actually brought them all back within their timeframes by cracking the whip inside the department, but also making sure that as a federal minister, you take an interest in a project that you know needs to happen. You use whatever provisions of the law that you can, and you make sure that you consult and bring industry to the table. Now, our environmental approvals are sound and they protect threatened species as they should. But if you let them drift, if you don't actually bring all the resources of government and the various steps along the way effectively and efficiently to the project and the process, I can assure you it can just drift on and on and on. And then if you have environmental activism in there, of course, you're in a court system, which just throws it out into, lots of delays.
So when did it become apparent that we were going through a bit of an energy crisis? I mean, as we were saying before, back when I was working in agriculture, energy didn't seem that expensive to us, but it's changed now.
It's changed because of the renewables policy of this government, and it's changed by way of evidence when you look at what somebody's electricity bill was 3 years ago or their energy bill compared to what it is now. I visited a major producer of food whose energy bill is in the $60 million mark, and they're buying energy on the spot market and from day to day and week to week, not necessarily sure whether it's actually going to be, whether they're going to make any money out of what they're producing. And these are ingredients that go in your freezer and your pantry. And to me, it was just a real example of how energy is critical in a manufacturing process that involves food, which of course builds on agricultural value add. But when I talk to these businesses, I say, okay, if you're prepared to share this with me, what was your energy bill on this date about 3 years ago, and what is it now? And it's exponentially higher in many cases.
Yeah, it sounds like we haven't really invested that much money in producing energy in this country for 30 years.
I think that nuclear energy can completely transform Australia and its manufacturing. And I love it when I talk to young people, by the way, because they don't have the disposition that some have against nuclear. And I really believe that it's young people who will demand of the other political parties that haven't got there yet, just like they've done in Europe.
Is that
it's certainly
young people are the only ones who'll probably be around to see it?
I think it's because they don't have the recollection of military era nuclear. And I think they see that it's a pathway to net zero, which we've committed to. And you can't get there without nuclear. And I think they see that 19 out of 20 of the world's most developed economies are either nuclear or going nuclear. The British Labor Party, the perfect example right now. So let's keep talking about it, I say to people. And I mean, 10 years ago, I think people probably wouldn't have been so willing to take it on as an idea. But now it's really being embraced.
Well, there's a lot of water in Farrer. There's a lot of transmission lines that crisscross the country. Where would you put a nuclear power plant?
Well, we've said you'll put them at the 7 locations where we've had coal-fired power stations. So you wouldn't have one in Farrer.
Wouldn't have one in Farrer.
But it's interesting you mentioned those transmission lines, because if you know my electorate at all, you would know how unpopular they are. And we're talking about towers twice the height of the pylons on the Sydney Harbour Bridge and massive, massive blades that are so big they have to have a special port to be imported because they're not being made in Australia, through the port of Brisbane. And then they have to go on special road transport at special times of day. I mean, this is beyond.
What?
This is next level when you actually imagine it on the landscape. I just come back from the electorate of Paterson, and the Port Stephens community has said, we're not having these off the coast. Nobody asked us if we wanted them, and we don't want them. So you've got
the
to
windmills.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So you have to. My point is that renewable energy is important and it has its place, but you have to do it with consulting with communities. And my constituents really look, and they can see that these new transmission lines and these giant wind turbines are providing energy for renewables, yes, for people who would never see a wind turbine near them and probably wouldn't like the visual look of them if they were right off, say, the coast of Bondi.
No, I was just talking about the transmission lines that carry power around the country and how ones that go to Adelaide, ones that go to the East Coast, they crisscross through Farrer. There's a huge amount of water in Farrer. It's almost ideally placed to put one. So is there any chance we're going to see the Kumiella nuclear power plant in the future? Or
no, we've been very definite about the locations.
Okay.
And Farrer is the home of irrigated agriculture. I must get that plug in.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say irrigation feeds the nation. So that water, unfortunately, being misallocated by the current government because of a deal they've done with the Greens political party. But I back my farmers in, and I know you do, Errol, every day of the week with what they do and how well they do it. Because you've obviously met people who do what they do better than anyone else in the world.
Yeah. Haven't met Angus Taylor yet. I think he'd know how to allocate some water. It'd be good. He's very experienced at that.
Another country liberal.
He's coming in soon, so we'll have a chat to him about that. You, speaking about farmers, you mentioned food there before. Two companies which are just about as on the nose as you can get at the moment with farmers, consumers, everybody, Woolworths and Coles. There's going to be some ACCC findings coming out probably after this podcast is released, but just before we speak here. What do you guys got planned for the supermarkets if you're successful in a couple of months' time?
Look, the supermarkets are under pressure because cost of living is hurting everyone. But I don't want to see duopolies in any field of endeavour, including the supermarkets, which is why I passionately support our independent supermarkets, wherever they are and whatever they do, and I shop in one near me. But I also don't think that there's any point in an exercise in bagging out the big supermarkets. We've said that we will take sensible measures around divestiture, and I think we've struck the right balance there, and I think that's important. But the overwhelming feeling, I think, is how can I afford my grocery bill when people are shopping in both Coles and Woolworths and indeed any other supermarket? Because it's so expensive, and it's not necessarily the fault. It's not about ascribing blame. So exercise care when it comes to duopolies. Be prepared to step in where you need to. Fight for independence where you have to.
I'm so curious about the divestiture thing with the supermarkets. Can you tell us more about that, please, and what the plan is?
Well, it's if lines are crossed, then lines are crossed and governments can reserve the right to not insist, but under, a range of end-of-the-line conditions. The first step is to have a supermarkets commissioner who actually is a place where many of these complaints can go. So I don't want to foreshadow that this would ever actually happen. I think the first step is to keep everyone honest by keeping everything open and transparent. And an office of a supermarket commissioner will do that.
Just on unfair duopolies, Qantas and Virgin. I've been walked into the chairman's lounge by Richard Goyder, and it's nothing to write home about. One thing is that Rex has had some troubles recently, and it's a critical piece of rural infrastructure. If the Albanese government doesn't find a buyer, they're looking at nationalising it. Is that something that the Liberal National Coalition would look at?
There's 43 regional airlines in Australia. I know many of them, and I know many of the people that fly them, and they're pretty incredible. And I just say there's highly likely to be scope for some of them to take over the routes that Rex might exit. and what the government's talked about, I think is quite confusing for the market because it's proposed for June, which is obviously post-election. So it seemed to me like a virtue signalling statement that didn't really link to any action. But I'll always back in country people and their access to affordable flights. In fact, I think for Australians, that's what they expect. Obviously, safety, number one, but affordability when it comes to any airline policy. And we should never forget regional Australia in that.
Would you trade up Qantas for a regional airline as your first preference?
That is such a hypothetical question, Errol, that I'm not really going there.
Okay.
No, I'm not going there.
Speaking of working together, people with different views, who do you like or who do you enjoy spending time with or don't mind a yarn or a beer across the aisle? Are there any other, let alone in the Greens, is there anyone in the Greens where you're like, he's all right, Max Chan-Lamar's not too bad, I don't mind a beer with him? Or is there anyone you take fishing?
Well, my general answer is if you picked up a group of cross-parliamentarians and put them somewhere, they'd get on really well. And we'd all put aside the differences we have, or we might have a laugh and a beer about them. So I don't think it's as intense as people think it is. I think the Speaker does a good job at bringing both sides of the Parliament together. I think it's funny because I often get asked, the Speaker really doesn't like you. And I say, it's not like that at all. We get on really well. We have a laugh and a beer.
Yeah, he's got a job to do.
And he's got a job to do. And, if I look back over the members of Parliament who were there when I first came, some of them are no longer there. And I had great friendships with them, probably more so when I was on the backbench. When you're in a position like this, you're fairly busy and you don't always have that much downtime. But yeah,
What's it like getting booted? I know it happens to a lot of different people, but when you're told by the Speaker, go outside, take a break. What's the first time it happened to you? What were the emotions or what were you feeling?
Look, that was a bit harsh. Okay, better cop it. Head for the door.
How long do you have to go out for? What's the go?
An hour.
And you have to go for an hour?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And you just can go off to your office or whatever, or are you hanging? There's no sin bin chair that you have to sit in?
No, you go to your office.
Yeah.
You don't leave the building because, of course, you don't leave the building. So you go to your office and find something else to do and watch Question Time on television. It all looks a bit odd. But look, the idea is not to get booted out. I mean, I honestly say when people say, you're getting booted out and, why? Because I just get swept up in the moment and there's something that's said on the other side or a point that's made that I so disagree with or I know is so wrong and you just can't help yourself. So that's what it is.
One thing I've always found curious is that you often see the leaders of the two sides go and meet behind the Speaker's chair. What are they talking about?
Well, probably a process thing. In other words, when we finish this particular piece of the day, we might move on to a motion on X or a bill on that. So yes, it's basically procedural. There's a lot of cooperation when it comes to the process of the Parliament because under the Westminster system, the Parliament operates with a set of rules and those rules have to be followed. And a lot of that does require cooperation. So it's an example of what I was talking about before. Everyone's not always, trying to cut the throat of the other side, so to speak.
Has that changed? When you compare it to when you first went into Parliament, was the relationship better or worse, or has it pretty much stayed the same throughout across the aisle?
Look, I always wish there were more opportunities for people to mingle and talk to each other. Yeah. And I think people do spend the jobs have got bigger and busier and social media means there's more things that you do and the committees are very busy and
24-hour news cycles.
The 24-hour news cycles are a perfect example. Yeah. And if you're keeping in touch with your constituents while you're in Canberra, you try to find an hour to call the people who've called your office and you really feel you need to speak to personally. By the time that's all done, it's 10 o'clock at night and everyone's had enough. Yeah, I think it's a much more somber place than people think of it as, and probably more than it was in the old days where, the old Parliament House where I wasn't, by the way. Been in politics a while, but not that long. It seemed far more convivial.
Yeah. Now, a bit of a long-winded question here, but one of the things I think is important to live by is the theme of tips, not slips. There's nothing worse than someone who's gotten on the back of something and then afterwards they show you the slip and say, how good's this? This week we've learned about the opposition leader having a rather good win. He did pretty well, some smart investing in the stock market. Did he give the tips out to anyone else that he thought the major banks might pop over the next few days?
I actually think that's a very unfair question. And I thought it was a very unfair attack on him. And, I made some remarks at the time about a dirt unit powering up, and probably I would have preferred the proper economic planning to power up instead, because I think the average, let's look at how, never mind how we might see it, but how the average Australian would, that he's achieved a lot for his family. He's worked bloody hard. He's been very open about what he's done and when, and he answered a lot of questions about it yesterday, and he said he's happy to answer more. So I think most Australians, are comfortable with a leader who is, number one, strong, and number two, prepared to work hard for himself and his family for financial security and sustainability.
Just on the unfairness thing, isn't that the dirt unit's part of politics? I mean, Albo was dragged for, and rightly so, for a long period of time over his Copacabana beach house. Buying shares in the big banks the day before a bailout package comes and then selling them after, and having not bought or declared shares for 3 years before, seems pretty savvy.
He's explained it. And I think the explanation is fine. But I do want to come back to that beach house.
Can you see it's a bit savvy?
No, not at all. But I just do want to come back to the beach house because people assume that we're critical of the Prime Minister for buying property. And it's actually not what it is. But he's the Prime Minister. He's bought a retirement home way outside his electorate in the middle of the most intense period of being Prime Minister. I don't think that sends quite the right message. So I think it's important that when you talk about what we may have said, we haven't characterised it as why is he buying this property, but why is he buying a retirement home right now?
So all of your properties inside your electorate?
Well, he's clearly buying it for retirement.
Yeah, but that's down the track.
He might have that as a beach house. I mean,
he might.
Like a lot of very successful people, they have a beach house. And I would say that the Prime Minister's been quite successful in life up until this point.
He's done all right for a Camperdown kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has done all right for Camperdown kid.
How you feeling? The election is pretty much here, right? Like we haven't had a date announced, but we're in campaign mode. Are you feeling it already?
Feeling it already. It feels like a campaign, that's for sure. And I'm, very energetic, very enthused, very keen to bring it on so we can get to the other side, because I want to see a change of government. I think we'll win. I think we must win. I think we are working incredibly hard, the whole team. And I know that as people involved in the political process, we welcome the chance to effectively showcase our wares. A lot of people don't think about who they're going to vote for until the election is called. So that's a great opportunity to talk to as many people as possible and fight for what we believe in.
I have voted for John Howard. I voted for Tony Abbott. I voted for Malcolm Turnbull. Why should I vote for Peter Dutton?
Peter is a strong leader who can bring this country to a place where we just haven't seen this Prime Minister take it. And Peter Dutton knows what it's like to leave Australians behind, because he, me and the rest of the team have watched this government leave Australians behind, break promise after promise, and not seem to care about how hard their lives are. And in the most complex geostrategic circumstances that the country and the world is facing, we need a leader like Peter Dutton, focused on national security, focused on personal security, understanding what it means to both keep Australians and the country safe, but also back in those willing to have a crack. And there are people.
So just another hypothetical. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but which eccentric billionaire would you have in the party room to help you run the country more efficiently?
I don't.
They have to be born overseas. So like our equivalent of Elon Musk. So you've got Mike Cannon-Brookes, was born overseas. He could come into the party room and tell you what you're doing wrong and how you can help out. Or do you have another one in mind?
Well, I don't think you have to be an eccentric billionaire to come into the party room and tell us what we're doing wrong, because everyone gives us advice every week, every day, every which way, as they give every single politician in this country advice. I suppose my point being is that, good luck to people who've made their billions of dollars, but you need to stay in touch with the people who are normal, working class, ordinary, everyday Australians. And I often say every small business in this country could run the economy better than the Albanese government. I'd have a few of them in the party room. In fact, we've got a few of them in the party room in our ranks.
So, Twiggy Forrest?
I'm not going to,
certainly not Simon Holmes at court.
Yeah. Well, it's just kind of asking me to be personal about people. And, I think if you can't say something nice about someone, you don't say anything at all.
Words to live by. There was a good pitch there before in regards to what a government looks like under Peter Dutton. Could you do us a favour and have a chat to him, please? We'd love to have him on the show and hear it from him. We can leave the share thing behind if we need be, but we'd love to have a chat.
You've got a long lineup of people on your
we do.
List,
We've got a lot of people coming through. We mentioned Angus Taylor's coming through, Jane Hume in a bit, but we would love to speak to Peter. And I don't know.
So, what do you think about the Homebush Hotel?
Absolutely. I'd like to do that on the eve of the election.
It's certainly worth the half-hour drive up from Balranald.
But you'll be flying directly from Albury with me, or you're not prepared to get in a plane with me? Is that what you're saying?
No, I know, absolutely. But look,
you're looking uncomfortable.
I've heard that Albury is just Queanbeyan without the proximity to Canberra.
I'm not sure what to make of that. I'm not going to be negative about Queanbeyan, but Albury is Albury.
It's better than Wodonga, though, isn't it?
Well, there is a river in between, and that's an important divider. Yes.
There's a beautiful lake out there in Albury as well.
What a lot of people don't know about the Murray is that it belongs to New South Wales.
Yes.
And Victoria starts at the high tide mark over the other side. Yeah, because they're useless.
There you go. All right, we could do that. Could we bring someone else along as well? Maybe we bring I think there's an independent running Millthorpe in your electorate.
There's a Climate 200 candidate. Yeah. That would be that person.
We bring someone else along for a healthy, robust debate at the Homebush Hotel. A couple of beers.
Who was that ex-cop independent that ran against you that time?
He's the mayor now.
Paul Mack? Something?
Yes.
Yeah, Paul Mack, yeah.
All right, well, let's do that. Thanks very much for joining us, Sussan Ley.
A pleasure, thank you.
Thanks for coming.